Good evening, everyone. Or is it still good afternoon? I'm not sure. Welcome to the Center for the Less Good Idea and to this evening's presentation of how showing making. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with this form, it is a form presented under the umbrella of the Academy, so the Academy for the Less Good Idea. My name is Athena Mazarakis. I'm the MOMENTEUR of So, the Academy for the Less Good Idea. And how showing the making gives us an opportunity to engage process. It gives a platform for artists to speak to their methods of making, their strategies of making. And tonight's quite exciting because we get to turn the lens inwards towards ourselves, to our own processes, and to a very particular process that we're in the middle of now, this collation on-air series, visual radio plays, that have been conceptualized and envisaged and led by the impresario for the Less Good Idea, Neo Muyanga. And so this evening, this first part of the evening is an opportunity to give you some insight into how we did what we've done. And I hope that you will be joining us for the second half of this evening's programming, where you actually get to experience the visual radio plays. And hopefully this will give you a little bit of an insight and some interesting things to look out for. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Neo.
Thank you, Athena. Welcome, everybody. It's been an exciting journey for us, and I've been sharing with people how this occurred for us, for me, originally. And the anecdote I've been telling is, growing up, I used to listen to radio plays on the wireless together with my mother and my grandmother. And one of the key things I remember was how we would be very close listening to the same narrative. But in fact, what was happening was we were participating in imagining who was talking, what they were wearing, where they were talking from, and how long they had been in that environment. So the sounds, the context, the histories, all was something that, as individuals, we were co-creating with them. And the theme of radio or theater for the mind, as the explanation of what radio play is really something that we wanted to explore with this template. What we've chosen to do, however, is to complicate it for ourselves by making them also visual. So the proposition is you can see a set of performers who are performing ostensibly to the radio and for your mind, but your eyes are watching them perform the choreography of what ultimately becomes the full narrative. And so the invitation is for the audience to become the participants in making, embellishing, completing each of the stories. We will stop there for the moment because we'd love you to see and hear more. We're going to introduce you to this beautiful contraption, this radiogram that we've brought back from Athena's cupboard.
Truly.
And we'd like to begin by inviting you to listen to one of our pieces that we performed yesterday, just the introduction, to give you a real sense of what it feels like to be on the radio.
Okay. Here we go.
We arrive into the storm. We arrive into the storm. Intense lightning and thunder shatter the silence of a late summer evening. And in the chaos and darkness, a crew of Johannesburg city power workers are washed into the sea under the city, adrift in the water of the city's sewer system.
Suffisant! The tunnels are taking us deeper into the depth below. But at least away from this terrible tempest.
We'll pause there, and we'd like to invite you now to come into the center space to reveal a little bit more about this and the other pieces that we are performing here. Please join us. Would anyone like to guess what was used in creating that soundscape that you just heard? And please, if it could be people who didn't see it yesterday, don't cheat. Anyone? I'm not going to ask you, John. Take a wild guess. No? Yes? No? Very shy? Okay, can some of the people who did see it guess? The metal sheet? Can we hear a bit of the metal sheet? Micca Manganye is a master metal sheet player. Any other ideas? The water. Could we hear some water? Micca Manganye is a master water stepper and also a master simultaneous sheet and water player. Any other guesses? And the rain stick. These are all good guesses from the people who saw it yesterday. Right. Well, what we'd like to do now is show you a little bit of what was occurring. We invite you to watch and listen, and we will introduce you to the cast thereafter.
We arrive into the storm. Intense lightning and thunder shatter the silence of a late summer evening. And in the chaos and darkness, a crew of Johannesburg city power workers are washed into the sea under the city, adrift in the waters of the city's sewer system.
Hold on to the sides! Come on, faster! Get on! I can't swim! Hold on! Oh, take the light! I can't see him! There! Quick! I've got you! Whoa! Hold tight! We're being drawn further down! I'm trying to steer!
Tunnels taking us into the depths below.
But at least away from this terrible tempest.
Thank you. So that was an extract from The Tempest that we featured last night, written by Bettina Melkames and performed by Mfundo Kekana, Vanessa Cooke, William Harding, Stompie, Selibe, Micca Manganye, and directed/conducted by Jaques de Silva. So with that, I'm going to invite Neo back onto stage. Just to also give you a sense that what we heard in the other space, in the second space, was live. It was not a recording. It was happening in this room. So we are simulcasting what is happening in this room into the listening space. And so for those of you who were here last night, you'll also notice that it was also a different performance because it is live. And it's not going to be captured. Well, it will be captured, but every night is a new performance. So Neo, I'd love for you to take us through a little bit about how you came to conceptualizing this project and the process to this point. How have we arrived here?
Thank you. One of the key interests for me was I'm interested in text, and I'm interested in writers who are pushing what text does. So one of the first ideas was to approach writers who write beautifully, whether that be fiction or non-fiction. Even the poetic form would be interesting. But ideally, people who'd never written a radio play before. And to ask them to think with us about, firstly, choosing a story of their liking or of their interest, that they could extrapolate using really the dramaturgy of sound. It's a very simple seeming brief, but in fact quite difficult. The idea of how do you write a whole text as a literary person, but think through the sonics. And it's clear that the person writing doesn't always know what the sound of the thing they're writing is. So I'm thinking now about Elton John's Candle in the Wind. What is the sound of a candle blowing in the wind? So it's that kind of exercise that you invite people to. And we commissioned writers like Matthew Wilhelm Solomon, who's here with us tonight, Bettina Melkames, who's been mentioned, Andrew Buckland, Qondiswa James, Kollega Potuma, and I'm forgetting, and William Harding, who's also here. And William Harding was the only person actually who said, in fact, I'm almost ready to send you a script because I've been thinking about radio plays too. Andrew Buckland replied immediately, yes, I've never written one before. And then he said, I'm going to Google how do you write a radio play, which I thought was a great response. And we then had to find a cast to allocate. But the scripts all took various lengths of time. We couldn't predict when they would be ready. We had given a deadline, but the deadline became more and more flexible, more and more liquid, and we were getting more and more worried because we wanted to ask people to perform, but we didn't know what they'd be performing. Eventually, we decided on performers we thought were already interested in breaking out of their boundaries in terms of physicality, vocality. So we invited a set of people who were writers, performers, to what we called a reference sharing circle. So on the 12th of January, very soon after the New Year, we gathered upstairs, and I played them some of the references I'd collected as examples of how you think about a story through sonics, examples of how radio has been created before, and then we played lots of YouTube videos showing Foley artists creating sounds in very unexpected ways. All of this was part of the foundation of the making. Then, of course, once the stories were completed and we knew what was going to work, we then allocated characters, or sometimes people, well, they either volunteered or they were voluntold into certain roles based on their voice, based on their personality. We also had directors that emerged out of the process because we couldn't ask everyone to direct a piece that we hadn't determined before. So all of this was very fluid. It was very much like the Tempest. We were floating on water for quite a long time. And in the end, we had our first workshops here in the middle of March. We had 1 week of intense working on the scripts, firstly understanding what was the story being told in each of them. So we sat here, did a read-through of each of them without casting, and then we selected people into groups who went off and tried various experimental things. And then we came back and people decided whether they were attached to one story or another. Other people wanted to be in more than one story at a time, so then we had conflicts about scheduling the agenda for who was going to be rehearsing where. But all of that was really foundational to how we came to deciding what sounds were going to go into the pieces, how long they would be, who would be performing those sounds. We also had these wonderful musicians, Micca and Stompie, who were asked to play outside of their normal paradigm, and everybody really came to the party. Yeah.
So you've presented a really strong provocation for us. You've given us the provocation of visual radio play, which sounds like a paradox. And so the one person who really had to tackle that paradox was the scenographer and costume designer for the Sense of the Less Good Idea, Ntabi Singh Malaka. So Ntabi, I'd love for you to share with us a little bit about how exactly you did that, because you had to create what it is that holds what happens in this room, how you direct our listening through our eyes. So for someone who is really quite familiar with designing for the stage, both as a scenographer and a costume designer, what was this process for you in designing for a visual radio play?
Hello, everyone. I think for me, it was like a proper challenge because it's for radio. So why do we need a set? Why do we need costumes? But because it's visual, I had to think a lot about how to space the whole section. And I was intimidated by the whole thing, but Neo is here for support. And I spoke to Zane, who's the head of sound here at the center, and what we had spoken about was to have the space in sections so it makes sense for us. So we'd create a space where the Foley, the small props would be, and then we'd create the Foley boxes where the foot and stepping and walking would happen. And then we'd have a young section there for Micca to do his thing with Stompie. And so that was the first thing. And the set had to work for all the different scripts. And then it was, so I've never done anything to do with radio. I do sets and costumes, so. And then, as like Neo was saying, the scripts were not complete, so I didn't know what we're gonna be doing. And I think when you don't know, you just make offers. And the offers were objects that I had found, anything that can make a sound. I was like, Micca can use this. Anything that made a sound, I came with and put together. Also asked people in the office to bring some things, like random things. So that was how the objects came about. As we were playing during the workshops, the setup was very different. We had 2 trestle tables with all the objects and all the artists over here. And then I got to think about the space in a way that works. And one of the things that Zane came to me with was the sound in this room is going everywhere, and it's not working effectively for him. And he wanted to put these sound panels and lean them on a corner so that, and I was like, no, Choma, let me build something boothy like, you know, so you kind of like have that studio feeling. We have the people that are speaking in this booth, and the sound will be more controlled, and he approved, and he was excited, and then we built it, and have like a table that artists can walk around and use the things that are here, but also be able to make eye contact with the people in the booth. And did I speak about everything?
You did, and that's a really good moment to bring Zane in.
Yeah.
Because what you're speaking to, Ntabi, so beautifully, is this absolute very close collaboration that you had to find between the aesthetics and the technical, and this little dance that the two of you danced together to figure that out. So Zane, if you could speak a little bit to what Ntabi's introduced for you in terms of what this is and how it works. So if you maybe start with the sound booth.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, so when we were doing the workshop the first week, we brought in normal mics just to try and see what sounds we could make. And very quickly, everything that we were doing was just capturing the room. So when you're across the hallway, you would hear someone's voice right next to the mic, but it would sound like the room. It sounds like they're in a room somewhere. So that wasn't working. So I tried something. I brought in this little thing to cover the microphone, and it worked, but it restricted the actors from being able to use the microphone. And there's like, I think at most there's 7 people in that booth at one time. So that's why we have 2 mics there. But the one microphone, it has 2 sides that you can speak into. So we can use that microphone for 6 people and the other microphone for 3 people, kind of thing. The booth that Ntabi made is brilliant. I love it, and I want to keep it forever. And yeah, that's the booth, really.
So you were telling us something earlier that was really interesting to me, in that the moment you created the booth and you placed the mics in there, it shifted, it helped the performers in a particular way. Do you want to?
Well, so in my experience, most of these actors have been theater actors, but they've also done voiceover and TV stuff, and they know how microphones work. But I think being on stage, as soon as you're in the space and you get into a stage, you feel like you need to project, you need to do your training. So making a booth gave them a kind of visual cue to, oh, you know, I've done this before. I've been in a studio, I've done a voiceover. And they were able to get into that mode where they were able to get super close to the microphone to make it sound like they were right next to you, or to pull away and make it sound like they're falling down a tunnel. Yeah.
So that's possibly a good moment to bring the actors on to give us an illustration of exactly what you're talking about. So if you wouldn't mind. So, I thought Zen was going to stay there.
Oh, I can go
followed
back.
us.
I'll go back. I'll just be here.
So-
Hello again.
So maybe just to talk us through some of the techniques, the vocal mic techniques that we discovered along the way.
Yeah, like I said earlier, if you get super close to the microphone, it sounds more present, which I think logically makes sense.
Hello.
And if you get far away from the microphone, it sounds like you could be in a different room or down the hallway.
Hello?
Yeah. And each actor kind of, we kept having to go back to it, like how we use the microphones and how we, even with these microphones, how we play with them, because you just want to grab a microphone and talk into it wherever. But if you just speak into the side of a microphone, it can be muffled, it can be weird, it can sound terrible. So it was part of the rehearsals and the text. Every now and then all of us, we kept having to remind each other about how we use the microphone, getting closer. I put headphones there for everyone so that they could listen to themselves, but no one uses them.
I have a problem. I had a problem. So I got built a little platform so that I can be the same size as everybody else. So I don't have to cause a problem. My little platform is actually called a Paganini, and there's one in every studio. Paganini was a very short violinist, and he was in a big orchestra. So they built him a little platform to make him bigger. And any short actor can tell you who's been in a radio play, where's the Paganini? I gotta have my Paganini. So, yeah. So I can get close to the mic too.
Is it, could you show us, perhaps choose a piece where we see multiple people using the same microphone? Because one of the interesting things about this process was how you had to choreograph yourself around the same microphone. We couldn't have one for each actor.
Edie, darling!
Yes?
The oven is beeping!
Yes, Mzee, I'm coming.
Ooh, Edie, you look gorgeous.
Thank you, love.
Come here.
Come
That's disgusting.
Come on, Mzee.
Yes,
Let's check on the
no, baby,
cheese
don't.
That's an extract from a piece called The Dalmatian and the Duck, written by Andrew Buckland. It's about a small crisis that happens on one special evening where a very innocent duck gets murdered. Oh, you cannot see me. It's an extract from, this is Dimi, who tells us all what to do here at the center. And she does it extremely well. It's an extract from a piece that was written by Andrew Buckland, and it's about a small crisis that occurs on an evening where the family is trying to impress a visitor. Unfortunately, the dog is trying to impress the family, and the way the dog tries to do that is by murdering an innocent waddling duck, and that causes a whole trauma. And William, Vanessa, and Qondi were playing some of those characters.
And also in Dalmatian and the Duck, it's another interesting aspect of acting for the microphone is the possibility of performing multiple characters. And Vanessa did a magnificent job of performing characters, and I wonder if, Vanessa, you'd show us a little extract of Mrs. Farquharson, who's a sort of older lady who doesn't really speak in any intelligible language, and Greg, who's a 12-year-old boy? 12-year-old boy, so I don't know if you can give us... No, not 13, 12.
So Mrs. Farquharson comes to visit, and she's an animal rights expert, and she hates little boys. You, real? What are you? I'm in Standard 6. No, I'm not at the Ridge. Mrs. Farquharson, would you like some wine? Oh, I love some wine.
So we developed a really wonderful technique to help us find simultaneous translation in the radio play World Class African Citizens. So I wonder if Qondiswa and Mfundo could demonstrate that for us.
The technique I used instead of a Paganini was high heels, just wearing high heels. Ndikhumbula ndiseyintwazana ndake ndabethwa ngumbane.
I remember when I was just a little girl, I was once struck by a lightning. It was like a fire ran through me and burnt all my skin.
Akukho umbane elalini. Oomakhulu abadala bahambe banyuke.
When there was a lightning in our village, all the women went up to the highest point of the cliffs to go and pray for the lightning to leave our village and go to the next one along the coast. They seem so powerful.
Another thing, just before you, we had to develop a technique also in Dalmatian and the duck of like when you're whispering. And there were a couple of things that we tried. We tried the over mouth, but then eventually we kind of ended up with, me and William can demonstrate.
And we had some wonderful help
From
John, who's has worked in radio and has made Foley things. So he gave us some wonderful suggestions as well, and this was one of them. So.
Mzi,
Yes?
there's I think the table is wobbly. Could you help me stabilize it under the table?
Yes, okay.
The dog.
What? Where?
Behind the window, behind Mrs. Ferguson.
Behind the window? No, that does it.
Hi, Mrs. Parkinson. I'm sorry, I'll be out in a second. I'll be right back.
Great. So now that we've got you all in the booth, I'd just like to take a moment for you to maybe share with us any other discoveries that you found, and particularly to speak to the adaptations you had to make for this new form that is not strictly a radio play, it's not in a booth, in a building somewhere without an audience, and it's not a theater play, it's somewhere in between. So Vanessa, I wonder if you could step onto your Paganini again and talk to us a little bit about how you found this balance for this new form between speaking to the mic but also including the audience.
Yeah. When we had our first audience, which wasn't public, it was the people who were working and so forth, people came in and they were very quiet. They all crept into their seats and we started the play and very, very quiet. And I realized that they didn't feel comfortable about making a noise because we were doing this serious, like, radio play. So I thought I must include them. So I, especially as the little boy, I included the audience in my life with my parents and my dog. So I worked out that it would be fun to use the audience so that they could enjoy themselves and laugh out loud. Yeah.
So any other discoveries? Jaques, I know you had something you wanted to share about this form and what you found as an actor.
Yeah, for me it was, we were doing a run and I got asked, is there a reason why you're talking so loud? And it's because my experience of a microphone is to amplify, is to make sure that everyone can hear, but to see it different, like Zane said earlier, to capture, to allow, to use, to be able to play with a microphone as a canvas to be able to paint on, and then you can really start to like do all that fun stuff that you learned in acting in drama school, where the reason why you do your warm-up so that you can go very low, or you can play all the way up and you can go do the fun stuff. And so paint your pictures using this beautiful canvas.
I think William also had something interesting about the when you guys were doing the storm and the physicalization.
Yeah. So I mean, it's kind of what Jaques was also like saying. It's about, even though you're acting for a microphone, it's there to capture you, but still the rules of acting still sort of apply. So a static voice is not as interesting as a voice that is in movement, that is embodied. So we discovered that, sure, you could perform the whole thing like this, but if you got your body involved, it did something to the voice. And maybe we'll demonstrate it. There's a scene in The Tempest where later on there's a fight between Caliban and Prospero. The Tempest is an adaptation of Shakespeare's The Tempest, but here Prospero is a rat. And him and Caliban have this sort of battle. And for a while, Jaques, who was directing us, didn't quite get enough out of it. So he invited us to really sort of go for it. So it sounded a little bit like, yes. Go, Caliban.
So
too bad we didn't do that yesterday.
So thank you for stepping into the shoes of director in that moment, because as I look at you, we've got people playing multiple roles. They're performers, but they've also stepped into the role of directors, and we also have two of the playwrights in this group. So, Qondi, I wonder if you would kick off, both as a writer and as a director, generally what this process has been for you and what this new form has meant for you in your writing and your directing.
So like William, I've also been thinking through like radio and just trying to find myself in a space where I can actually do a radio play. And so Neo's invitation really came at a really good moment for me. And so yeah, I wrote a play that I thought, okay, if I just focus on writing out the sounds, it'll make it a radio play, right? Like you write text, and then in the moments of stage direction, I just write sounds. And then what I found in the room, so I can be quite precious about stuff that I've written. If it's not a commission, if it's something that's coming from me, I can be very precious. So I appreciate being able to be a writer in the room. And then what I found is that the writer had overwritten. That's what the director found. And actually the director found that through discovery from the actors, right? In trying to figure out language to say, I think I'm looking for this. I think it's more an interpretive soundscape than it is a literal soundscape. And then at some point I had to even step back further as a director and kind of because I think that radio, the text is very important, of course the dialogue is important, but there's this thing of the Foley and the sound. And so at some point I had to really like let go and let the soundscape find itself. Oh, okay, you've written 12 cues here, but actually all you want is for us to seem like we're in a mine. Oh, okay, cool, right? And so to give them that space. And because I can be so precious, sometimes things, they're not sounding like they're sounding in your head or like how you wrote them. And you thought that this sound would be able to make this sound, but it doesn't, right? And you get worked up. You get really, really worked up. You get emotional. You get all sorts of things. And so there was a really interesting kind of exploration for me of vulnerability in space with others. And that thing of letting others and trusting others, firstly to hold space for you and to gently say, I don't think in this moment you are the most helpful voice, which is incredibly good to hear and to understand that even of yourself. And then to have them take it on and have them discover stuff and to figure out how not to be precious, but also when you are, to have people understand that. So that was some of the things that I discovered.
Here we go to Jaques. Jaques, so you directed The Tempest, Bettina Malcolmessa's work, so a little bit about your decoding of the text, your interpretation, and how you grew it through the direction.
And my first attempt at it, I think I had 120 sound cues. And I tried to get everything happening at the same time, and I tried to, and then shifted the text a little bit so that we could see it. But it is, what I learned from that was actually what we want as images. And to give, what I want as an actor is not for you to tell me what to do, but invite me into your world. And so that was what I think we found is this is the image that we're looking to create. How do you find that with the tools that what we've got? And what is lovely is when we watch a play visually, we create the world. It's not just the words that come out of your mouth. It is the space. It is the people in relation to each other. What we get to do with these radio plays is we get to create that journey with sound. We set up the environment first, invite people into our world, and then we reveal text and adventure. And we get onto the boat, we get into the water, and then we go, which was fun. Yeah.
William, as the director of Dalmatian and the Duck, but also author of And Then the Sea, and then directing that, your insights?
Yes, I mean, again, it's kind of what my co-wonderful humans have said. It's all about rediscovering sound as a way of putting on work, you know. And I think that it was very interesting to take the texts as offered and to see what sounds, what is called Foley, how you create different sounds and how those would serve the stories of each specific play. So I discovered that during Dalmatian and the Duck, it was very much about having precise, literal sounds because those would best serve the telling of the story. Other plays, like in The Tempest, like you heard, it was really about creating a soundscape and an environment, and you know, and later on, which you didn't quite hear, there's this beautiful soundscape of being in the sewers, and it's really giving this idea of environment. Yesterday there was another show, World Class Citizen, and there what Pala did in the soundscape there was to create something that was both literal but also emotive and grew a sort of poetic understanding. And some of the shows tonight are also a different soundscape. They're about poetry. The other one that I've directed, we're not going to ruin anything, but it's sort of about deconstructing sound. It's kind of like the molecular gastronomy of radio plays. So it was really about thinking, how does Foley serve the story, and what is the author trying to convey, and how can we best serve that using whatever is at our disposal?
You said a set of keywords: precise, literal sound. You said.
Yes.
And there's a lot of that in the Foley conception we had. If I can ask Micca to emulate for us that part in The Dalmatian and the Duck where the duck is being buried by Mzi, the character, to show us the use of the Foley trays, and then burying it with the heavy brick.
This is the last anyone is going to see of this damned wretched duck. We are going deeper than the dog's nose can fathom. And now, several bricks on top, and the hole filled in, and a big rock on top of that. There. No dog without an industrial excavator is going to extricate that dead bird.
Of course, Drongo, the intrepid dog, promptly digs up that buried specimen. And that was really using natural objects. This is a set of stones that Ntabi Seng introduced into the production. They are actual literal stones that would be found also in a garden. We have a set of shoes here that are walking in various scenes.
Can we hear them?
So I'm a high heel, so we can use to walk faster, slow, and so demonstrate nje kancane.
Micca is an incredibly talented percussionist. He can make music with anything. This is the biggest challenge I've seen him face. Please show, and then I'll tell.
So ama-boots lawa, so ngizowasebenzisa ku-concrete to walk.
Wonderful. Now, Micca, I'm sure you understood what he was saying, right? Now can you, ungasibonisa the way you used to walk with the shoes? Before we workshopped how you walk with shoes. Yeah.
Hey, mina mang hamba. Hey, ngihamba ngendlela. Ngenza so ngithi.
And I kept saying to him, Micca, that's not what it sounds like when people walk. You're playing shoes like a drum. It can't work. And we figured out what? The shoulder is where it counts. And the other part of the Foley section is both Micca and Stompie, who are talented musicians, who bring a flair for harmony. Right? Micca brought a sense of the theatrical to that metal sheet. Can you show us the various ways that you use that metal sheet?
Okay.
This is the first one.
First one, and then there is two.
This is the second technique. And that's the final strike of lightning thunder.
So the reason ukuthi ngithole ama-sound kunokwenzakala ukuthi imvula mangabe ina uyizwa from distance kude wenzaka so that to find ile sound.
Make us saying he had to decide on how to make it sound like rain or thunder effect coming from very, very far. So he had to find a nuanced way of operating the sheet.
Then there is two, it's how mangabe we shake when we shake it like smooth like we turn like nice until it develop, and then when the strike down there we say shaka pull then we can.
He says to find the correct vibrational resonance, you have to fall in love with the metal sheet. There's water in the bucket, and to make the sound of paddling, he had to put his extremities into the water and pound it. There's water there too.
There is marbles.
Inside the bucket is a set of marbles. That's why it rings on after he's left it. A huge discovery. So all of these took cast members who were willing to break their own boundaries of understanding what these items are. They represent one thing in the literal sense, but they could also be repurposed into other forms. And then we had Foley and accompaniment that was melodic. Stompie, you had quite a lot of melodic material that you introduced. Can you show or play one? And what are you, sorry.
Yes.
What are you thinking as you do that? What is the scene you're setting?
Well, the first scene that I did with the drawer, it was to establish the sort of the introduction to create a moment of a scene of sort of sadness, or to create a picture in your mind how this sort of looks like in your head before you see the picture. So I think the indigenous bamboo saxophone sort of gives that sentiment of listening to the radio. It's sort of creepy, kind of an old sort of rusted saxophone that sort of gives that sentiment of it.
Thank you. Any other thoughts around Foley that anyone would like to reflect on?
I have one. Oh, damn. So when we started with the tests, we used a lot of microphones like the ones we're using to speak in. And same thing with the vocal mics. They were just picking up everything, the whole room, the instruments next to them. So we ended up getting these microphones, shotgun microphones, these long microphones that are usually used in film, usually as a boom swinger, following a voice. And the nature of them is that they're very, the area that they're picking up is quite long, but very thin, very fine. So I had to track down like 8 of them, which is a lot more difficult than it should be. And each thing had to get one of those mics so that if they're all going at the same time, they can be separated while still being a very clear sound. And that helped with all of the Foley, with the instruments, with the ground. Yeah.
There was also Neo, the Foley table, which I know Mfundo does quite a bit on, if there's anything there that would be interesting to demonstrate. Like
Yeah, please, can we show us the violent scene that we have in our the child-friendly play?
So if William will take Gerard's dog just to set it up.
Dad?
And that violent ending, which really brings the theatre of the mind into play, our ability to listen and then fill in the gaps so astutely, as we all just experienced there, brings us to our last section, which is speaking a little bit about the listening room.
The listening room was a very fundamental idea from the beginning, because we wanted an alternative space where the public could experience the radio, really. One thing is to see the choreographed movement and the presentation, but it becomes quite another when you are allowing yourself to accept that this is in fact reality. And it's happening inside each of our minds. And so we set up a simulcast room so that what you hear in there is what's being performed live here. And again, we use that beautiful radiogram, and that was designed beautifully by Ntabi Singh. Can you tell us a little bit about how you thought through that design?
Hello again. I think this part was challenging, but we got to it. And we are still figuring it out in terms of sets and sidelines and a visual radio play. But the other side that is for listening is a space that requires intimacy. I think it's choosing a period in the ways that the furniture is chosen, and also like the lighting. If you are listening that side, you'll get to see. But because there's nothing to watch, I've set it up in a circular way that we are able to clock each other, like laugh at certain moments or You know what I'm saying? Because there's nothing visual to look at. You're just there to listen. It was just an intimate space that I thought would be home vibes. Yeah.
Last night we had, at the beginning, the majority audience was sitting here comfortable to watch. By the end of the night, I think just over half were sitting in there. People were lying on the floor and listening. So for me, that was a very strong indicator that you found that intimacy and you found that sense of revelation.
Shout out now.
Nice one.
So because we're gearing up to the performance in a very short while, we only have time for 2 questions. So if you're burning to ask a question, best you get your hand shooting up really fast. Dave. And I'll take this.
So Neo, at the sort of outset of the project, you mentioned an interest of yours being how storytelling changes, or what happens to the act of storytelling when we depart with a dramaturgy of sound. So I'm interested at the kind of close of this project, or this iteration of the project, what those reflections are.
Yes, thank you, Dave. Right at the early days of radio, turn of the 20th century, there were 2 ideas about what radio represented. One was, this is where you find truth. This is where the public gets to express their reality as they see it. It's where propaganda could be pushed out of the way because voices of the actual people could be heard, voxus populi. But there was an alternative view, which was, it is a medium for creating an alternate universe. And this was very interesting to the Dada movement, to the surrealists, who thought to reinvent what was reality rather than to stay true to it. These 2 views really were taken up by 2 schools of thought. One was for the truth platform. Revolutionary movements particularly wanted to identify their public and proclaim their message through the radio, and they used, in many instances, pirate radio. We remember our version was Radio Freedom during the apartheid era. Many liberation movements across the continent used those kinds of mechanisms. And we had an understanding of our history, the pre-colonial history. This is what some theorists say. Based and premised around orality, the idea of what is oral, O-R-A, and oral, A-U-R-A, as how information was passed down from generation to generation. So the sound of history was very prevalent and very strong in informing our feeling about history. What then happened from the Industrial Revolution onwards was the introduction of mechanized systems, reproduction systems rather, and how those became more and more visual in persuasion. So radio moves to television, and that became the medium of proclaiming the propagandist outlook. The government, the advertising agency, Marshall McLuhan became a very powerful force who was telling the world not only what to think, but how to think. The idea of the cigarette becoming the cool was really invented through this period of advertising, and it was really profiled through television and film watching. Sound is also a very seminal way that film became such a powerful medium for the entire world. Hollywood happens to have some of the best studios in the world, and one of the reasons it was very important to be precise about sound was because they found out very early on in these mechanisms that introducing sound to storytelling introduces a lot of emotion. And that is what guides people to either believe in what you're telling or not. An illustration of this is the first genre to really gain prominence around the world was horror. And it was because horror was a really dramatic way to induce feeling in a public. You weren't indifferent to the hammer that was coming to nail you. If you think of watching that scene in The Shining, or watching any Alfred Hitchcock film, any horror film, in fact, try watch it with the sound turned down. There's nothing horrifying about it at all. This was discovered very early on, so the idea of sonics gives you access to emotion. So for me, one of the key things that I wanted to think about today was how we could recuperate some of this thinking around sound, but it was about finding a way to connect emotionally to people who were watching the stories we were wanting to tell today. That was really the key idea that I had.
Thank you, Neo. So I'm going to have to retract my 2-question statement because we have now run out of time and we need to set up for the performances. But thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to the artists. Thank you, Neo. Thank you, everybody, Zain and Tabi Singh. We look forward to seeing you very soon back in the space. Thank you.